I want to review the recent debate between Stefan Molyneux and Vorsch about the source of wealth, where Stefan Molyneux's answer is that the free market as a mechanism is the explanatory variable that produces wealth, that has produced the massive increase in wealth that we've seen over the past few hundred years. And Vorsch says that it's workers who produce wealth and generate wealth, and they're the source of wealth. And so Molyneux's question to Vorsch is, we have had workers since forever. We've had labor since forever. We had slaves since forever. If they're the source of wealth, why do we have this massive exponential increase? And Vorsch never really addresses that question, and it effectively concedes the point to Stefan Molyneux, where he says, of course, some workers are economically more productive than others. I'm not necessarily against market mechanisms. It's not like I say that capitalism hasn't been positive. Whereas there's actually a stronger objection that Vorsch could have raised. Is implicit in the question that Stefan Molyneux is raising. He says, why do you get this exponential increase? What changed? Which shows to me, well, I don't want to be uncharitable. I don't want to say that Stefan Molyneux doesn't understand exponentials. He does understand exponentials, but the way that he's asking the question immediately makes you think of a response where you say, well, no, when an exponential changes, when you have that sharp upturn in an exponential graph, that's just the nature of exponential processes. That doesn't indicate that anything has changed. In fact, it indicates that nothing has changed. The exponential continues apace. When you have an exponential process, the rate of increase increases. So the first part always looks flat, and the last part always looks like it's just approaching vertical. It's getting steeper and steeper. So it looks like this massive spike without any explanation. That's the nature of exponentials. You're asking the question, why is there this exponential increase? What changed? And so that doesn't mean you don't understand exponentials, and there's still a charitable interpretation of his question. So let's get to that. Instead of just talking about how ridiculous his question is, let's say, well, no, it makes sense still. Because you can say that it changed from a flat graph to an exponential graph that previously it wasn't. So, you could say that there was some change. Stefan Molyneux's argument is that it's the introduction of free market policies in England and the UK. England then, it wasn't the UK yet, and then later in the rest of Western Europe, and that's what allowed for the Industrial Revolution to happen. And that you have to look at the Black Death and the reduction in the supply of labour such that it was exceeded by demand, meaning that there was an incentive to invest in labour-saving devices because ancient civilizations knew about the steam engine, as Molyneux points out. So it's not like we never had the idea. It was just that if you've got free or cheap labour, slaves or low-paid workers, then you can produce whatever you need without needing to invest in labour-saving devices. And in fact, it would be a waste of resources to invest in that. That would cost you something in the short term. So now, there's something to be said for what Molyneux is claiming here about the free market and about the supply of labour. But his case isn't as strong as he thinks it is, as he's presenting it. There are questions that you can raise. So the population crash of the Black Plague, it did have a massive impact, but that doesn't mean that it wouldn't have happened anyway. There's a process that happens when you get economic recessions. Everybody knows you get recessions every 5 or 10 years. You don't know exactly when they're going to happen, but there's an underlying process where things get overvalued, overpriced. People get optimistic. They see things going up and they want to get in before it goes up even more so they can make some money and sell at the peak, the tip. So the crash is kind of designed in into the makeup of the system. And so you've got prices increase across time. And then you've got the actual price going along, and maybe it's actually going up. And to start with, things are underpriced, and then they meet the price and they exceed it, and there's a correction. And so it takes a shock a lot of the time, an external shock, to induce a recession. But it's still something that happens. And so you can have these underlying processes. And so you've got the exponential graph of wealth, and you've also got the exponential graph of population. And the Black Plague is a blip on the population one. So you can just think of it as an exponential process in the long term across most of time. But then there are these squiggles in the line. It's never 100% accurate. And the Black Plague is the biggest squiggle that you get. On the scale of the entire exponential graph, it's not that big a deviation. So there's always going to be some deviations in time. And that's pretty much the same as a process of recessions, where things go above and then get corrected back. And so it's much like an external shock that reveals some underlying process. So it's like it was always true that labor-saving devices would be more profitable. And if you continue right, to exploit cheap labor over time, eventually you're going to get to a point, as soon as any kind of labor-saving device emerges, as soon as there's one, and somebody has, then somebody has got, or not just a labor-saving device, but something that increases productivity. There's always things increasing productivity over time that they come in and they're game changers, and maybe they get brought on more early by an external crash. But when something like that comes along, somebody can all of a sudden produce way more, and so they're willing to pay more for the labor, and so you get a scarcity of labor anyway. And there's also another continuous process that Stefan Molyneux is ignoring, which is the improvement of technology. Now, we had steam engines in the ancient world. Yeah, that's true. They're sort of toys. But there was mechanical engineering innovation throughout the period. Not so much in Western Europe after the fall of Rome and sort of the decline in the Middle Ages, but all of that classical knowledge, it sort of migrated east. There was the eastern half of the Roman Empire that we traditionally call the Byzantine Empire, but it was just the Roman Empire. It was the same material culture, different language, Greek, but they called themselves Romans. It was called Rome. And then after that collapse, there was the Muslims, and there were also like Muslim engineers as early as the 12th century, inventing things like the crankshaft, which are massively significant components for the Industrial Revolution. So that process was still continuing exponentially and moving around the world. It's just the slow, flat part of the exponential, and then it builds up in the late second millennium. So that's pretty much my theory of how workers lead to productivity. Workers have some multiplicative factor. You've got workers increase their productivity over time. They get better at what they're doing. They learn the best way of doing it. They try different ways, and so they come up with new ideas, and that's just churning out at a constant rate. But the total number of ideas that they have that are recorded and are transmitted from one generation to the next increasing over time. It's a cumulative process, and so the capacity to increase productivity increases based on that. You come up with sort of one innovation, and all the workers are using that, and that now allows those workers to, produce the next thing. Say, for instance, writing. A lot of other things depend on that, and once you've got that, or mathematics, then you've got a whole bunch of the stuff from engineering and once you've got engineering, you can develop industry and all these labor-saving devices that come with it. And there's things like better farming methods and all that kind of stuff. That can still just be workers improving their work, improving their productivity, coming up with new strategies, coming up with new processes. It can still be a constant underlying rate and just something that builds on itself. So that's my possible suggestion for how somebody like Vorsch could have defended his position against Stefan Molyneux. Now, I'm not saying that I necessarily agree or disagree with either of these guys. I'm just trying to assess the facts and assess the arguments and see how you could steelman these things. So that's my first debate review that I'm actually going to publish, and leave me your thoughts in the comments. Thanks.